Imagine this. It's Saturday afternoon. You've just wrapped up a 55-hour work week, solved every problem, paid every bill, and finally, you're home. You grab a snack, settle into your favorite chair, and put on your favorite show. Not even 10 minutes pass before you hear it. The sigh, the pointed comment. Must be nice to just sit around while everything else still needs doing. Suddenly, your well-earned break is treated like a moral failure. Why is it that, in some unhealthy relationship dynamics, seeing a man at ease creates tension? Why does your downtime feel unsettling, even when responsibilities are clearly handled? Let's talk honestly about why certain partners struggle with male rest, and why peace can trigger anxiety instead of appreciation. You sleep in on your only day off, and the dishes get louder. You watch a short YouTube video, and suddenly there's a mental list of chores that can't wait. You try to take a nap, and the vacuum starts outside your door. It's not about urgency. It's about visibility. It's not that things must be done. It's that you are not doing them at that moment. I once worked with a man whose partner would literally track how long he rested. If he sat down for more than 20 minutes, a new task appeared. Trash that could wait. Groceries that weren't urgent. Projects that didn't exist an hour earlier. He worked full-time in a physically demanding job, constantly on his feet. But his rest, that was treated as negotiable. She worked part-time, yet his downtime became the issue. Then come the comments. Real men don't need breaks. My ex was always productive. Must be nice to check out like that. These aren't casual remarks. They're subtle pressure points designed to link rest with failure and exhaustion with virtue. Over time, the message sinks in. If you stop, you're lacking. This is where the equality conversation quietly collapses. Many people talk about breaking traditional roles until men step into spaces associated with recovery or softness. Meditation? Questionable. A massage? Strange. Sleeping in and enjoying a slow morning? Suddenly suspicious. The idea of balance becomes selective. You're encouraged to share burdens, but not always allowed to share benefits. Rest, relaxation, and self-care are often framed as rewards for emotional strain. But men are still expected to be constantly available, constantly producing, constantly useful. When you slow down, it feels like you're crossing an invisible boundary. In some relationships, constant motion is reassurance. A man who's always busy feels safe. A man who's resting introduces uncertainty. Questions surface. Is he losing motivation? Is he still driven? Is he changing? Your rest doesn't threaten love. It triggers anxiety about stability and identity. Listen carefully to the explanations, because they often sound reasonable on the surface. I just want us to be productive together. I hate seeing you waste your potential. There's always so much to do. But underneath, the message is often the same. Your stillness makes me uncomfortable. I once had a client whose girlfriend criticized his weekly basketball game. 2 hours a week, bills paid, responsibilities handled, repairs done, finances managed. Yet that small window of enjoyment was labeled immature. When he pointed out her daily hours scrolling social media, it was framed as staying connected. His joy was wasteful, hers was justified. What's really being negotiated here isn't time, it's control over energy. A busy man is predictable. A constantly occupied man doesn't reflect. He doesn't question. He doesn't reassess the direction of his life. Try this thought experiment. Ask your partner, if financial pressure disappeared tomorrow, would you be happy if I spent my days relaxing and enjoying life? Many men assume the answer will be yes. Less stress, more freedom, more security. But often, the response reveals discomfort. Not because of money, but because of autonomy. The issue was never income, it was independence. In some dynamics, your success is only welcomed if it flows outward. Invest in the family? Great. Support shared goals? Encouraged. But invest in yourself, your interests, your rest, your inner life, and suddenly it's framed as selfish. Early retirement becomes suspicious. Hobbies become threats. A man with time becomes unpredictable. I've seen people openly prefer a partner who earns less but stays busier. A man with financial freedom and time has space to grow, reflect, and build an identity that doesn't revolve entirely around the relationship. A man running on exhaustion rarely asks difficult questions. There's often an unspoken comfort zone imposed on men. Capable but not independent. Successful but not self-directed. Strong but not autonomous. Step outside that zone by resting too much or dreaming too freely, and discomfort appears. Partners who feel insecure in their contribution to the relationship are often most threatened by male rest. When someone fears being evaluated, reflection becomes dangerous. Keeping you busy keeps you distracted. Exhaustion becomes reassurance. Rest becomes risk. Healthy partners understand the opposite. They know a rested man shows up better. As a partner, a parent, a human being. They see recovery as an investment, not a loss. But in unhealthy dynamics, rest is framed as time stolen. Every quiet moment is treated like neglect. Guilt becomes the weapon. A good man would always be fixing something. A caring partner would give every free moment to family. A responsible provider would take on more. In that mindset, rest is never neutral. You're either producing or you're failing. And eventually, men internalize it. You sit down and feel lazy. You enjoy a hobby and feel selfish. You rest and feel anxious. No one has to say anything anymore. You start policing yourself. Over time, this pressure doesn't just stay external, it seeps inward. Men begin to associate rest with guilt, silence with suspicion, and peace with danger. Even when no one says anything, the internal alarm goes off. Shouldn't I be doing something? Becomes a constant background noise. This is how burnout disguises itself as responsibility. Men in these dynamics often don't realize they're exhausted until their bodies force a shutdown. Headaches become normal, sleep becomes shallow. Motivation drops, but instead of rest, they push harder. They mistake fatigue for laziness and discipline themselves further. That's not strength, that's conditioning. What makes this especially damaging is how subtle it looks. There's rarely a direct command. No one says, "You're not allowed to rest." Instead, it's framed as concern, humor, or comparison. You've changed. You used to be more driven. I just worry you're wasting your potential. These statements feel reasonable, caring even, but repeated often enough, they turn rest into a moral issue. You're no longer choosing downtime. You're defending yourself in court. Men with hobbies feel this pressure first. Gaming, sports, music, reading. Anything done purely for enjoyment becomes suspicious if it doesn't visibly benefit the household. A man relaxing for pleasure alone challenges the idea that his primary value lies in service. Interestingly, this pressure intensifies after major life milestones. Marriage, parenthood, financial stability. Once the crisis phase ends, rest should logically increase. But for many men, it's the opposite. Expectations quietly expand to fill every spare hour. And children absorb this dynamic too. When kids see their father constantly busy, constantly tired, constantly sacrificing, they internalize a distorted version of responsibility. Boys learn that rest is weakness. Girls learn that men exist to be used up. No one teaches this directly. It's modeled daily. Some partners justify the pressure by pointing to equality. We both work. We both contribute. And that's valid, up to a point. But equality doesn't mean identical exhaustion. Fairness isn't measured by who collapses last. True balance accounts for capacity, not just hours. There's also a deeper psychological layer most people avoid talking about. A rested man becomes introspective. Reflection creates awareness. Awareness leads to questions, and questions can destabilize unhealthy dynamics. A man who never rests doesn't ask, "Am I fulfilled?" He asks, "What's next on the list?" Stillness gives space for uncomfortable realizations. Am I happy? Am I respected? Is this dynamic sustainable? Exhaustion delays these questions indefinitely. That's why rest can feel threatening, not consciously, but emotionally. It introduces variables that can't be controlled through schedules and expectations. Health consequences follow quickly. Chronic stress increases irritability, lowers libido, and weakens emotional regulation. Men become short-tempered, withdrawn, or numb. Then they're blamed for changing, without acknowledging the environment that shaped the change. Ironically, the very behaviors criticized, emotional distance, lack of enthusiasm, disengagement, are often the result of prolonged overextension. And when men finally do break, it's rarely graceful. It looks like sudden withdrawal, burnout, depression, or impulsive decisions that surprise everyone. "I never saw this coming," people say. But the warning signs were there, ignored in favor of productivity. Healthy relationships interrupt this cycle early. They recognize that rest is not a reward, it's a requirement. They don't measure love by sacrifice alone. They understand that a man who feels allowed to rest feels safer to stay. In contrast, unhealthy dynamics rely on constant proof. Proof of effort, proof of loyalty, proof of usefulness. Rest offers no proof, and that's the problem. Men often try to negotiate silently. They shorten their rest. They multitask during downtime. They stay available even while recovering. But partial rest isn't rest. It's maintenance mode. The nervous system never fully resets. Eventually, resentment builds. Not explosive anger, quiet withdrawal, a sense of being unseen, of being valued for output, not presence. And here's the hardest truth. Many men don't realize they're allowed to want rest. They've internalized the belief that exhaustion is noble, that peace must be earned endlessly, and that slowing down is selfish. But relationships built on constant depletion don't last. They erode from the inside. Love becomes obligation. Affection becomes duty. Connection becomes transactional. There's a difference between shared responsibility and shared burnout. One builds intimacy. The other builds distance. Men who finally reclaim rest often describe the same feeling. Not relief, but clarity. They think more clearly, feel more patient, respond instead of react. And that clarity sometimes changes everything. Not because rest makes men weak, but because it makes them aware. So where does this leave men who feel constantly tired, yet strangely guilty for wanting peace? The answer isn't rebellion. It isn't withdrawal. And it definitely isn't proving your worth through even more exhaustion. The real shift starts with redefining what responsibility actually means. Responsibility isn't endless availability. It's sustainability. A man who collapses under pressure isn't reliable. He's temporary. A man who never recovers eventually stops showing up, emotionally or physically. Long-term strength requires cycles of effort and recovery. Every system in nature works this way. Muscles grow by resting. Minds stabilize through pauses. Relationships survive through space as much as closeness. Healthy partners understand this instinctively. They don't compete with rest. They protect it. They don't see downtime as abandonment. They see it as maintenance. These are the relationships where peace doesn't feel suspicious and silence doesn't feel like neglect. Notice how different the language sounds in those dynamics. Go relax, you've earned it. You've been carrying a lot lately. Take your time, I've got this. That kind of support isn't rare. It's intentional. It comes from security, not fear. In contrast, unhealthy dynamics confuse motion with meaning. They prioritize activity over awareness. If something feels off, the solution is always do more. Never slow down and understand why. But slowing down is where truth lives. Men who reclaim rest often discover they're not lazy. They're drained. They're not unmotivated. They're misdirected. They don't lack ambition. They lack recovery. And when recovery enters the picture, everything shifts. Communication improves. Patience increases. Emotional presence returns. Even ambition sharpens. Because it's no longer fueled by anxiety. It's guided by clarity. This is where boundaries matter. Boundaries aren't ultimatums. They're explanations, calm ones, clear ones. I need downtime to function well. This helps me reset. I show up better when I'm not burned out. A healthy partner listens. They might not fully relate, but they respect it. They don't keep score. They don't weaponize guilt. They don't treat rest like a betrayal. If rest consistently creates conflict, that's not about time. It's about tolerance for autonomy. Men also have to be honest with themselves. Some use rest to avoid responsibility. Some disengage instead of communicating. That matters. Accountability still applies. But accountability and exhaustion are not the same thing. The goal isn't escape. It's balance. Men who model healthy rest give their children something powerful. Permission. Permission to recover. Permission to enjoy life without shame. Permission to be human, not just useful. Think about the legacy that creates. A home where effort is respected, but rest is normal. Where productivity exists, but doesn't dominate. Where love isn't measured by sacrifice alone. That's not weakness. That's emotional maturity. Here's the quiet truth most people avoid. Relationships that survive long-term are not the ones with the most effort. They're the ones with the most regulation, where both people know how to push and how to pause. If your peace constantly feels like a problem, that's worth examining. Not in anger, not in blame, but in honesty. Because rest doesn't destroy relationships. Resentment does. And resentment grows fastest where recovery is denied. So the real question isn't, am I doing enough? It's, am I allowed to be whole here? A relationship that requires your constant depletion to feel secure is not balanced. A partnership that supports your recovery builds something stronger than effort alone. It builds trust. Rest isn't retreat. It's renewal. And any connection worth keeping will understand the difference. Here's another uncomfortable truth most people avoid. When a man finally rests, he isn't just giving his body a break. He's giving his identity space to breathe. And that space is dangerous to certain dynamics, because space creates reflection. Reflection leads to questions, and questions threaten systems built on exhaustion. An exhausted man doesn't ask why he's unhappy. He doesn't examine whether the relationship is fair. He doesn't question whether his sacrifices are reciprocated. He just keeps moving. He survives instead of living. That's why constant fatigue is often normalized, even praised. You're tired because you're responsible. You're stressed because you care. Over time, exhaustion becomes proof of virtue. Rest, on the other hand, becomes suspicious. If you're calm, people assume you're disengaged. If you're relaxed, they assume you're selfish. But here's the reality no one wants to say out loud. Clarity is power, and rest creates clarity. A rested man sees patterns he couldn't see before. He notices how often his needs are minimized. He recognizes when guilt is being used as leverage. He realizes that love shouldn't feel like a constant performance review. This is why some people unconsciously resist male rest. Not because they're malicious, but because rest changes the balance. A man who isn't exhausted is harder to pressure, harder to guilt, harder to control. He's not reactive, he's thoughtful. And thoughtful men make choices instead of just fulfilling roles. And that's terrifying to relationships built on utility rather than mutual care. There's also a cultural layer to this. Men are raised with the idea that their value is conditional. You're respected when you're producing. You're tolerated when you're useful. And you're criticized the moment you pause. This conditioning runs deep. So deep that even when no one says anything, men still feel guilty for resting. That guilt isn't natural. It's learned. It's the voice that says, you should be doing something. Even when everything is done. Even when your body is breaking down. Even when no one is asking you for anything. And when that guilt is reinforced by a partner, it doesn't motivate, it corrodes. It turns rest into anxiety. Recovery into shame, peace into something you feel like you have to justify. Over time, this creates a dangerous internal split. Men stop listening to their bodies. They ignore warning signs. They override fatigue, pain, and stress until burnout isn't a possibility, it's inevitable. And when burnout hits, it's rarely met with compassion. It's often met with disappointment. That's the irony. Men are pressured to never stop, but when they finally break, they're blamed for breaking. Healthy relationships don't work like that. In secure dynamics, rest is not negotiated. It's respected. Downtime isn't interpreted as withdrawal. It's understood as regulation. Both partners recognize that emotional presence requires energy, and energy requires recovery. These are the relationships where silence doesn't feel hostile, where a quiet afternoon isn't taken personally, where a man can sit, breathe, exist without feeling like he's failing someone. And yes, accountability still matters. Responsibility still matters. Rest isn't an excuse to disengage from life. But there's a difference between responsibility and self-erasure. One builds stability. The other builds resentment. Men also need to be honest about this. If rest feels impossible, it's worth asking whether the issue is time or permission. Not permission asked for, but permission allowed. Allowed by the relationship. Allowed by the dynamic. Allowed by the unspoken rules. Because the real test of partnership isn't how much pressure you can endure together. It's whether you're allowed to recover together. A relationship that only functions when one person is depleted isn't sustainable. It's extractive, and extraction always comes at a cost. What's changing now is awareness. Men are starting to notice the patterns. They're recognizing that constant exhaustion isn't noble, it's dangerous. That sacrificing health for approval is a losing trade. That being needed is not the same as being loved. This shift doesn't make men weaker. It makes them more intentional. Rested men choose better. They communicate more clearly. They set boundaries earlier. They leave unhealthy dynamics sooner, or they improve them by refusing to participate in guilt-driven cycles. That's why rest feels disruptive. Because it is. It disrupts roles that rely on silence. It exposes imbalances that only survive when no one has energy to question them. And here's the part that matters most. Anyone who truly cares about you does not fear your clarity. They don't feel threatened by your peace. They don't need you confused, tired, or constantly proving yourself to feel secure. They want you healthy. They want you present. They want you alive, not just functional. So if your rest consistently creates tension, pay attention. Not with anger, not with accusation, but with awareness. Ask yourself whether this dynamic values your humanity or just your output. Because rest doesn't destroy relationships. It reveals them. And revelation isn't something to fear, it's something to learn from. A man who rests isn't retreating from life. He's returning to it with intention, with clarity, with choice. And that's not laziness, that's wisdom.